Welcome to the Explainer. The minimum wage. It's a topic we've all heard debated, right? But today, we're going to dig into a really specific and influential critique from Henry Hazlitt's classic book, Economics in One Lesson. We're just going to follow his logic, step by step, to see an argument you might not have heard before.
So the book we're looking at today asks us to do something kind of tough. Put politics and our emotions on the shelf for a little bit and just follow the economic logic. The main question it asks is pretty simple. Does the minimum wage actually do what we want it to do? Let's follow the author's argument and see where it takes us.
All right, so the author's entire argument really hinges on one single foundational idea, that a wage is, first and foremost, a price.
According to the source, our thinking gets a lot clearer when we stop treating a wage as some special social tool and start seeing it for what it is, a price. You know, just like the price of bread or a phone, it's governed by the same basic laws of supply and demand.
And this right here, this is the absolute heart of the critique. The author argues that a law can't just magically increase the economic value of someone's work. All it can really do is make it illegal to pay what that labor is actually worth to an employer. So if a wage is just a price, what happens when the government steps in and sets that price artificially high? Well, the book argues this leads to a direct and often really painful, unintended consequence: unemployment.
The author uses this super simple scenario to make the point crystal clear. The law, which was meant to help the worker, actually stops a voluntary deal from happening. Why? Because the employer just can't justify paying $30 for something they value at only $25 worth of work.
So if you follow this logic, the loss is a double whammy. The individual gets deprived of any wage at all, and the rest of us, the community, we're deprived of whatever that person would have produced. But the author argues that the consequences don't just stop there. That initial job loss isn't just a single event. It actually kicks off a chain reaction that can ripple through the entire economy. Now, you might be thinking, hang on, can't businesses just raise their prices to cover the higher wages? That's a common counterargument, right? But according to the source, that seemingly simple fix can totally backfire and create a whole new set of problems. It can create this kind of vicious cycle. The business raises its prices, but then we, the consumers, buy less of it or we switch to a cheaper option. With demand falling, the business has to cut back on production, which, you guessed it, leads to more layoffs. The attempt to save jobs by raising prices ends up destroying them instead. Then the author takes on another common argument head-on. They acknowledge this brave pronouncement, but they immediately point out what this way of thinking, at least in their view, totally overlooks. And this is the crucial point here. Killing off an entire industry has these big knock-on effects. The workers who lost their jobs don't just disappear. They have to go look for work somewhere else. And this sudden flood of new job seekers can, according to this logic, end up pushing wages down in those other fields. The author then adds another layer to this whole thing. They bring in government relief programs for the people who've lost their jobs because of the minimum wage law. And this brings us to what the author calls the central paradox. A law forbids someone from being productive and earning, say, $25 a week. Then the state turns around and supports that same person with a smaller amount of taxpayer money to be idle. In this view, society loses their work and the person loses their independence. This creates a really powerful disincentive to work. I mean, think about it from the worker's perspective. If you can get, say, $18 a week on relief, a job that pays $25 only gives you a net gain of $7. And the question becomes, is a full week of work really worth that small difference? For a lot of people, the motivation to take that job gets a lot weaker. So after outlining all these potential negative consequences, the source doesn't just leave us hanging. It proposes what it sees as the only real way to raise wages for everyone in a sustainable way. This one sentence pretty much captures the core of the proposed solution. The author is basically saying, we've been focused on the wrong target. The goal shouldn't be to artificially fix the price of labor, but to increase the actual value of that labor. So, how do you actually do that? Well, the source argues that real wage growth comes from making workers more productive. This means things like investing in better tools and machines, coming up with new inventions, improving management, better training, basically anything that helps a worker produce more value in the same amount of time. And that's how it all ties together, at least in this economic view. A worker's wage isn't really determined by a law. It's determined by the value they create. If you increase that value, the wage will naturally go up, without any of those tricky unintended consequences. And so, the source material leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question.
It reframes the whole debate. It's not about compassion versus greed, but about a choice between two very different economic engines for trying to improve people's lives.